at least when the Cavs need to make a shot back in the 90s. They called on this guy, legendary point guard, Mark Price, former Cavalier. Mark, thanks for joining us this morning. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, guys. Hope you guys are well.
We are, and we thank you for coming on. You've been our White Whale guest for a year now, and it is an honor to have you joining the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. I know Jason wants to ask about shooting prowess and different eras of basketball, so I'll go in a different route and save that for Jason. But Mark, it was a disappointing end to the Cavs season this year in totality when you look back at the 82 games of the regular season and how it ended against the Knicks. Did you expect more from this squad come playoff time?
Well, I think everybody had a few question marks just because they were so young. There was so much lack of experience going into these playoffs, besides Donovan Mitchell's experience in the playoffs. But I think everybody's hopes were high because of such a great regular season. Winning 51 games got everybody's hopes up. I think the only thing that was probably disappointing to me a little bit was toward the last few games, the little bit of lack of competitiveness out there. It looked like to me, whether they won or not. But overall, like I told many people, I think just getting that taste of playoff experience, you can talk about it, you can say it's going to be different, but until you actually are playing a 7-game series and having to do the back and forth of what that brings, I think overall it's going to be of great value to these young guys as they head into next season. Hopefully they'll learn some lessons. I think they were all disappointed in their performance during the playoffs, but hopefully that'll drive them to work harder this summer and to be a little bit more hungry going into next year.
Mark, when you played, I remember just watching you guys, and in the Eastern Conference at that time, it was almost like the best of the best. There was, the Cavs were sandwiched in between. You had the Celtics from the 80s. You had the Pistons who won back-to-back championships. Obviously, our arch nemesis, the Chicago Bulls. But teams like the Philadelphia 76ers were really competitive. The Atlanta Hawks with Dominique Wilkins were very good, too. So, when you look at that climate, can you kind of compare that and contrast it to how you would go in every single year, not really knowing who was going to be a team from year to year that could give you a really tough time?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The Eastern Conference was a beast back when we were playing. I mean, the Pistons were winning championships, the Bulls were winning championships, the Celtics. Most of the championships were coming out of the East. And so, you could go down the list. I mean, the Milwaukee Bucks had good teams. You mentioned it, the talent on the Atlanta Hawks. So night in, night out, it was super, super competitive. And it was always going to be a question mark. I mean, even the New Jersey Nets, who we had to play a couple times in the first round, were a very talented team with guys like Derek Coleman and Drazen Petrovic and that crew. So it was night in, night out. I think helped maybe prepare us a little bit more. I think the Eastern Conference this year wasn't as strong, and so I think it was positive for the Cavs to get good placement in the playoffs, finishing fourth. But the lack of preparation might have hurt them a little bit because they are allowing things to be a little bit more physical in the playoffs, which the league had gotten away from for the last couple of years. So making that adjustment is something that they're going to have to grow through, learn from their experience this year, and at least they now have an understanding of what it takes once you step out into the playoffs, and it's going to be a little bit different game than the regular season.
Mark, I do want to ask you about shooting, and I think you were ahead of your time, but when we're talking about this era of the Cavs and this year's version, there were a lot of comparisons to this team and your team in terms of like good guys that are just quiet, they're not loud, they're not out there, it's not ego-driven, they're just good guys who play well together. But there also came a label of soft, and your teams were always labeled as soft. I'm just wondering if you ever took offense to that, if that ever bothered you.
Well, it didn't bother us because we knew it wasn't true. We played offensively a little bit more of a finesse game probably than some teams, just because we had such great shooters and ball movement and the way we passed the ball offensively. But I mean, we had 3 7-footers on our team. I mean, we were up in the top of the league in block shots every year and steals and those kind of things. So, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. I think, people tried to, we weren't out there trying to take people's heads off every night, like the Pistons are trying to hurt people out there. But the whole idea of being soft, I think, is something that people like to talk about. I don't know that that's anywhere near what our team was. But I think more than anything, I think compared to like this team this year, it's just a learning experience and growing. They got some skilled players. I mean, you had a guy make the all-defensive team, and Evan Mobley this year as a young player. I think that bodes well. Jared Allen's a shot blocker as well. I think they got away a little bit from what they do in the playoffs. And, I mean, when you got guys like that, I mean, I wasn't, a great one-on-one defender, but I knew how to funnel guys to my help. And, I mean, if I was going to get beat, I was going to make sure they were getting funneled to Brad or Larry or Hot Rod, who was going to clean it up behind me. And the Cavs have that in Mobley and Jared Allen. So, they got to do a little bit better. I thought they allowed too many easy looks from the outside. Make those guys drive it into your strength. Make them play over those big guys behind you. That's what they did all year long. And they seemed to get away from it a little bit in the playoffs.
Mark, in your career, you averaged 5.3 three-point attempts per game, which was, in the top 10% of your era. In today's NBA, that's like number 75 in the league. There are almost 80 guys in the league shooting 5 threes a game. How many threes do you think you would have taken per game if you were playing in the 2022-2023 season?
Oh, man. You're exactly right. Like, I actually led the league twice in 5 3-pointers taken a game. And that's like a first quarter stat now. So, yeah, whenever we get together, Brad and Larry and those guys, I tell them, man, you guys are lucky we're not playing today because I would never pass you guys the ball. I'm just like going to jack it up, man. I'm going to get my 13, 14 threes up a night.
Mark, you brought up Evan Mobley as a defensive player, on the first team all defense. Now, we've talked about it, and you've been a great shooter. You're shooting over 5 threes a game, right? Back then, that was insane. You also have been a shooting coach, and you've also been in coaching. And we talk about Evan Mobley as a guy to really unlock what the Cavs can really be, for him to develop a three-point shot, to develop something where he can positionally be in the low or high 30s, low 40s, to get, the Cavs to be where they need to go. Do you think a player is either intrinsically given a gift to just be able to shoot, or as a coach, do you think you could possibly unlock some of those shooting ability inside a player who traditionally hasn't been a three-point shooter?
Well, I think, especially now with the emphasis on three-point shooting, I mean, most every team in the league seems like has a shooting coach now, or someone that fills that role. I definitely think everybody can improve their shooting. Now, can a guy go from a average shooter to a great shooter? I'm not so sure about that. I think there's just something that some guys just have. I mean, Evan Mobley could work till he's blue in the face and he's not going to become Steph Curry. It's just some of those top-ranked shooters just have something that's a little bit, different, a different mindset, a different touch to what they do. It's something that they are comfortable with. And I don't see Evan Mobley ever kind of turning into that type of player. I think he could be one of the top two-way players in the league by far, because he does have the ability to score. And I don't know that he'll ever be a 25 a game scorer, but he doesn't have to be. If Evan Mobley gives you, 16, 18, points a game with all the defense that he does and the way he can alter the game, I mean, that's a huge step. And consistently, he doesn't have to be a 25, 26 point score to affect the game, but he's got to be able to score enough points to be a problem, to make it difficult on the other team to just load up on Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland every night.
Well, we're talking about Mobley. He actually regressed as a three-point shooter this year. He went from around 25% last year down to around 21, 22% this year. I know that's something he keeps working on. And kind of to what G was asking you, what's realistic for him? I don't think he's going to go from 22 to 35% in one summer. But what do you think is a realistic jump that someone in his position could make?
Well, I think if he continues to work on it, I think he could eventually get himself in the 30% range, 3-point wise. But I just always go back to, is that helping by him shooting a bunch of threes? Is that helping the Cavs, or is that helping him as much? I'm not so sure. I think you got to play to your strengths. I think you've seen guys over the year that have had huge impacts, guys like DeMar DeRozan, even Kawhi Leonard to a certain extent, and he shoots a few threes, but he's a mid-range player. And I think, you look at a Jokic, different guys like that. I mean, Jokic might take 2 or 3 threes a game, but, he's doing his damage, mid-range, around the free throw line, becoming a problem, being able to feed to his teammates, score. And I think, obviously he wants to improve his three-point shooting, but I think if he's spending all his time focused on that, I don't know that that's going to be the right direction for him to go. I think he can affect the game much better in much different ways.
How do you feel about the way that the game has evolved to where it is? You mentioned a couple guys that still thrive in mid-game or mid-range, but most of it is threes and layups. And I'm just wondering, as a point guard, and by the way, let's make sure people realize you were a 40% three-point shooter in your career. That's Ray Allen-like. That's better than James Harden career. Like, best of the best, a shooter before his time. But maybe you love it because you were a good three-point shooter. Just where are you at with today's era of NBA basketball and the emphasis on three-pointers or layups?
Yeah, I think the analytics is obviously taken over the league, and you watch a team, and I think people get enamored because the Golden State Warriors had won championships shooting a ton of threes every night. But I think it always goes back to what your personnel is and taking advantage of what you have and who you have on your team. I mean, I was a three-point shooter. I was a very efficient three-point shooter, and I'm a much more about efficiency over than volume. And I enjoy the all-around game. I think that's why I enjoy guys like Jokic, Embiid, and those guys. I love seeing skilled big guys again that are doing damage around the paint and around the free throw line and making their teammates better. And I hope more teams would get to that. I mean, being a three-point shooter, kind of boring sometimes to watch teams take 90 to 100 three-pointers in a game. Yeah. I mean, it's I would say half of those, in my opinion, aren't even very good shots. And so, I mean, there's debates on that with every different person has their opinion on it. But I guess I'm old school in a lot of ways. I love the all-round game. I love seeing really good, skilled big guys. And the thing is, when you have really good skill, look at Jokic. I mean, they're getting up a lot of threes, but it's because they're playing through him. You have to double team him, and then he's going to hit it and swing it to the three-point shooters that can make the shots out there. And I think that's why Denver's so good.
Mark, I was going to ask a different question, but you just said something I have to follow up on. If you could run a pick and roll with any player in today's NBA to create the most deadly version of a Mark Price and player X pick and roll, which big man are you choosing to set that screen for you?
Today I would go with Jokic for sure. I mean, he's just so skilled, and he reminds me a lot. I was fortunate. I got to play with a great center in Brad Daugherty, and Brad reminds me a lot of Jokic. A lot of similarities in their game. Brad was probably one of the best passing centers in the game when we played, and it's just such an advantage as a player to have a big guy that, I mean, you leave him by himself, he's scoring in there. And if you double team him, he's going to hit the open guy. And when you have a guy that can do those things, it's a lot of fun to play with.
And one more question from me, Mark. When you, on top of being an excellent sharpshooter, you were a phenomenal point guard in the traditional sense too. You averaged over 10 assists a couple times, between 7 and 9 for your entire career. When the game was on the line, and this kind of played into what we saw late with the Cavs this year, in the postseason especially, it didn't look like they had that guy who wanted the ball in crunch time late, who said, give me the ball, I'll put the offense on my back, I'll make it happen. Do you think they would have benefited from either Darius or Donovan being in more of a traditional point guard role to set up some offensive sets late in games against the Knicks when they were so heavily focused on making one of those two guys pass out of double teams and let one of the other three guys on the court beat them? Just based on how you played and what you saw from your time doing that for over a decade in the NBA.
Well, I think that's something that the Cavs have got to grow in offensively. And I thought there were times this season during the regular season they were, but I just felt like there was way too many times during the playoffs that Mobley or Allen just were not getting enough touches on the offensive end. And I think when good players, and I think that's part of being a really good point guard, understanding. I mean, I understood if I wanted to keep my big guys involved, if I wanted them to help me on the defensive end or set a good screen on my guy, I had to keep them happy, sometimes, and keep them happy on the offensive end and keep them involved. And I even remember times during games, Larry Nance maybe hadn't touched the ball 3 or 4 times, and he'd run down the court and said, "Mark, get me a shot here, get me a touch." And that's just the relationship that we had by playing together for so long that, and as a point guard, that was my job. I had to look for mine, and there were certain games I might have had the advantage and might get up more shots, but I also needed to make sure I kept my teammates engaged in the game. And I think Donovan and Darius are both so good offensively in the one-on-one things, but I think at times if you do too much of that, the other guys get to standing around and watching and get out of the flow of things. And I think that's the balance. That's the fine line you have to walk when you're a point guard. I can get mine if I want to or need to, but I also need to make sure I'm taking care of everybody else.
What's your best story from those 80s, 90s Cavs team that we don't know?
The best story? Man, there's a lot of stories, I'm sure. But, I think just for us, being in a situation where, we were in the heat of it with some of the best teams ever. I mean, the Bulls and the Pistons and things like that. But I think more or less it was us believing in ourselves and hanging together as a team. And I think that's when you start seeing things. And that's what I like about this team as well, the current Cavs team, is they seem to like each other. And that's really important. I think you get a group of guys that actually like each other, that's more rare than you realize on an NBA roster. And so, when you develop that and you get to play, we were fortunate that core group of guys I played with, we got to play together for, 7-8 years together. And we weren't just good teammates, we were friends, and our families were growing up together and we were close. And when you have that, you got a chance to have something special and teams that can go out and compete night in, night out. And that's what it really takes when you're all pulling together. And I think that this current Cavs team has that. They seem to anyway, from just watching from the outside. Now it's just, continuing on the path. Hopefully the team can add some pieces that they need moving forward for next year to make them even better. But they're definitely a team on the rise, and hopefully they can continue to grow and grow together.
Mark, I like to highlight people from different eras who maybe the fans don't really kind of know about, right? When you play against, when you have an opportunity to see pros play, sometimes on TV you don't understand how good and skilled even the 9th or 10th guy on the bench is. Give me a name, underrated name of someone you played with in your time during the 80s and early 90s that you had a very difficult time with, or you just played with and was just like, man, this guy is so freaking awesome. Like, do you have a name or two of guys that may be underrated that were really, really skilled, but people may not give them their just due?
Well, I think you make a really good point, because I played in an era where there was only 24 teams in the league. And so teams were deep. From your top player to your number 8 player, those guys 6, 7, and 8 could come in and give you 20 on a given night. And we had a guy come through a couple years while I played with the Cavs named John Battle, that a lot of people probably don't remember, or that name's probably a lot of kids now probably have no idea. But that guy was like instant offense. He was our version of Benny Johnson, who played with the Pistons. When John Battle came in the game, he was coming in for one reason, and that was to get buckets. And he could do it. He could just flat out score. And there was a lot of guys in the league like that. It really meant something to be 6th man of the year back in those days, because those guys were legit and they could really, really score. And you had, guys coming in. Before Ron Harper got traded, we had Craig Elo, Hot Rod Williams, guys like John Battle coming off the bench for us. I mean, that's how deep we were. And so, I think John Battle's a guy for me that jumps up when you ask that question of somebody that's underrated. And I mean, John he was just, you knew what you were going to get from him every night, and he came in and he got it done.
Mark, we'll let you get out of here on this, but Brad Sellers is a co-host of ours. He's not here today, but he's on the show twice a week. I know you guys had some battles throughout your NBA times. Do you have a Brad Sellers story you can share with us before we let you go today?
Well, Brad, the only story, Brad was obviously on the Bulls teams that we battled against. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. You'd have to ask Brad this, but on the shot that Michael hit, I'm thinking Brad was the one that was throwing the ball inbounds. If I'm not mistaken on that,
yeah.
I could be wrong. But you have to ask him that. But
you're right.
But Brad was, he was a good player, a role player for them, a big guy that could shoot. He was a little before his time as well. A shooting big man that could stretch the floor. But Brad was a good player. Tell him I said hello next time he's on the show.
Before you get out of here, since we brought it up, we haven't really talked about it. Was the shot year the most heartbreaking for you, or which team did you? There was a couple teams in there that, boy, they were good enough to win a championship. And I know that was a first-round series, but was that the hardest one, or was there one that leaves a more bitter taste in your mouth than that one?
That was definitely, if not the hardest, one of the hardest ones, just because we felt like we were a better team. Unfortunately, we had injuries. I didn't get to play the first game of that series, which put us in a hole a little bit. But we had beaten Chicago 6 times that year. A lot of people don't realize that. We had pretty much dominated them all during the season. We were banged up, and then Michael, hit. A lot of people forget we were down 1 with 6 seconds to go, and we throw it in, and Craig Elo gets a backdoor cut, and we score in 3 seconds to take the lead. So, I mean, the ups and downs in the last 6 seconds of that game in the crowd, I mean, everybody's just going nuts, and then 3 seconds later, it's like dead silence in the building. But that was tough. Unfortunately, we got beat by maybe the greatest player that ever played, making one of the greatest shots he ever made. So, what can you do?
Well, Mark, we appreciate you taking some time to spend with us on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show today. Best of luck with whatever you're doing in the future. And if you ever want to come back, the floor is yours, Mark. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.